So I'm going to give a little bit of tips on how to write good text, because as I said, this is like I have to read a lot of text and I prefer that it's good, because otherwise my month will be extremely boring. So I think I've collected the 5 little rules that you can think about here, of 5 ways of doing this. The first one is now we've gone through the different text really quickly, but I think for if you haven't already done so, it's really nice to write a synopsis for each of the texts in the course literature. And a synopsis can contain what's the main claim or the main project. For example, in Cantor's 4-player model, the main claim is there exist 4 speech acts and well-functioning teams. In well-functioning teams, they use all 4 speech acts. The project is, of course, to create better dialogues in organizations. So that's the main claim, and then you can say what's it backed up with, what's the warrant, and I have this refutation and qualifier. I'm going to talk a little bit more about these, but basically you say what is it he backs up his claim with, and what he backs up his claim with is basically cases. So he's been out using this a lot, and he has cases. That's what he backs it up with. And his experience as a consultant, that's the main thing. So for example, it's not and sometimes it's more like a specific piece of research that underlies the claim, and if it is so, then you can say, well, what underlies the claim is, like, say, survey research where 550 people were involved or something like this. So you want to make clear what's the main claim, what do they base the main claim on, and the last thing is, again and again and again, what's the author's background and what are they responding to. In the case of David Cantor, his background is as a therapist working with families and system theory, and that influences the kind of theory that he comes up with. This way of writing a synopsis for a text, I also highly recommend it when you get to your thesis, or if you do internship reports. Then this is like when you do literature searches, then writing a synopsis like this for each of the papers that you select that you might want to use really makes it so much easier for you to do literature reviews later. So it's really nice to do this. The next thing is that when you write a text, it's really nice to think of the text as a string of well-argued claims. So you have the main claim of the paper, and then you think, in order to get to the main claim of the paper, what's the first thing that you have to convince the reader of? What's the next thing you have to convince the reader of? And the next, and the next, and the next. If you write the structure of your text as one claim after another, and then afterward expand each claim into a paragraph, which is a little argument for that particular claim, that's a really nice way of ensuring that your text has a really nice red thread throughout it. I'm going to show you an example of this in a little while. Then the other thing is, it's good to give more space to analysis, application, and synthesis, because that's what you get points for. Sometimes I read theses, or I read the exam papers where they spend, like, I don't know, 80% of the paper just doing what we just did, which is defining the different concepts of the theory. It's important that you can define the concepts, but I would say define them in one short, precise sentence, give an illustrative example, and then that's done. Because you don't want to waste space. You only have 10 pages, and you don't want to waste space on the kind of thing which you don't get many points for. The next one is use meta texts to help the reader orient throughout the text. So in the beginning of usually you can say, when you write academic texts, I remember one of my teachers says, writing academic text is like writing the most boring crime novel ever, because it's kind of like the first sentence you write is the butler did it, and then you explain why you came to that conclusion. By sometimes the natural way of doing it is like you describe all your observations and take the reader on a journey, and at the end you present your conclusion. That's not so good, because then the reader throughout the entire journey goes like, why are they saying this? If you put your conclusion at the beginning of a chapter, then it makes it easy for the reader to understand why all the other things are following. And so I think in the beginning of each section and in the end of each section, in the beginning you say what you will do in the section, and in the end you sum up what you did in the section. This helps create like a red thread throughout the paper. And then the last thing is just like a formal thing. It's not something that you actually get. It's not part of the evaluation criteria, but it's just nice. It's like there are standards for academic writing with references and abbreviations, and it's just nice to know them. For example, abbreviations, write out the full, like first time you refer to psychological sense of community, you write psychological sense of community, and in a parenthesis afterward you write PSOC. And then afterwards you can use the abbreviation to save space, but not the first time. The first time you write it out completely. Then there's a piece of referencing software called Mendeley. I strongly suggest that you download it. It's free, and that you use it. It's quite easy. I think the library at CBS also give courses, but you can also just go on YouTube and find a tutorial for how to use Mendeley. Again, if you learn to use Mendeley now and you start filling in the papers that you have had used throughout your master thesis now already, it's going to be really useful when you get to the thesis, because it's going to save you hours. It's basically you plug in, you use Mendeley to put in references after each, whenever you need throughout the text. And then in the end, you just ask Mendeley to generate a bibliography, and it just generates the bibliography. If you later remove references within the text, the references get removed in the bibliography. So it saves you so much time. Cool. Then I want to say a little bit, I don't know if some of you might know this one. It's the model of how you form an argument. So an argument consists of these components, a fact and a conclusion, and then some warrant and backing for how you got to the conclusion, and some reflection on why the conclusion might not be true, which is the rebuttal. And if the rebuttal is strong and the warrant and the backing are strong, then the qualifier you use is something like probably or maybe or possibly. If the rebuttal is really weak, you can't come up with something, and the warrant and the backing is really strong, then the little word here, it says probably. But if the warrant is really strong, you might say it's highly likely or something like this. In social science, generally avoid saying that you've proven something. In social science, you can always find like reasons to doubt your conclusions and not be 100% certain about them. So the example they give here is Rick has fair skin, red hair, and freckles, and he sunbathed all day yesterday. Then they know that people with fair skin and red hair and freckles, they usually get sunburned easily, and they have some information, they have an explanation for why that happens. And then they say, so the conclusion is Rick is probably going to get seriously sunburned. But then they say, well, but you know, that Rick's parents also have fair skin, red hair, and freckles, and they never seem to get sunburned, even if they are outside a lot. So that kind of speaks against the conclusion. And this is how you can like I said, each paragraph you put in a claim, and then you put in the rest of these elements beneath it. So you say how you come to this claim. So this is, by putting in these other elements, is how you expand the one-line claim into a whole paragraph. So this is a good model for thinking about how you argue something. I think a lot of I know that sometimes you've been told to say use the phrase "I would argue." If I see that phrase in your papers, you better have an actual argument. Because if you say, I would argue, and then you don't put in warrant and backing and rebuttal, then you're not arguing. It's just a rhetorical thing to sort of give your statements more weight, and that doesn't work in an academic paper. So yeah, watch out for the words I will argue, and check, do you actually argue something when you say you do? Cool. So when I say this thing about structuring a text as a string of claims, this is from a paper written by Morse in 1986, where his main claim is that intrapreneurship, that is entrepreneurship within a corporation, doesn't exist. That's his main claim. And how does he argue that? This is like basically these 6 strings that I put here is a summary of the entire like 8,000 word paper. So basically his argument says the newest advice to executives in large organizations is that they should revitalize their organization by encouraging entrepreneurial behavior among their employees. And then, so that's a main claim. That's the first claim he puts in. And then he puts in, like, of course, a lot of, he shows all the different papers that says exactly this. So that claim expands into a whole section, basically. Then he says the rationale for this advice is research that shows that the entrepreneurial behavior in small or mid-sized organizations produce growth. And again, you can see that's the second claim he puts in. So he's explaining the position that he will debunk. And here, of course, he then says, what are that research? What would follow this claim is he would say, it's been researched in this way, and in this way, and this way, and these are the findings, and so on. Then he comes with his main claim and say, I don't believe this position. I think that it's unlikely that large organizations can succeed in producing entrepreneurial behavior among their employees due to the nature of corporate culture. So that's his main claim. And then he puts in like an underlying argument. He says, we looked at what motivates entrepreneurship, and there's many factors, but there are 2 that stand out. One is they want to get rich, and the other one is they want personal autonomy. And then he shows why corporate culture can't give the kind of wealth or the kind of personal autonomy that would motivate entrepreneurs. So, so he concludes that entrepreneurship is not a viable way of revitalizing large organizations. I don't agree with him. I think he overlooks a lot of motivational factors. Basically, he says there are only these 2 motivational factors, and because the organizations can't credit those, then it's not going to happen. I don't agree with it. I think that there are other motivations. He should look at the other kind of motivations and say, well, maybe they are strong enough to actually motivate for people for entrepreneurial behavior. But his argument is good, only he's lacking a little bit of the reflection on the possible counter arguments. But I hope this gives you an impression of how you can check the flow of your argument and check the flow of your paper by basically writing out one-liners, and see if you can condense your 10-page paper into half a page or 1 page where you're checking the flow like this. It's a very nice way of writing texts. Then I mentioned that leave space for something other than just definitions. And that is because some of you might know this, Bloom's taxonomy. This is how you are evaluated generally in any essay that you're writing, basically in any academic text. So you can say the fact that you can remember and recognize and recall the sort of content of the theory, that is the fundamental thing. If you can't remember the 4 elements in Cantor's 4-player model, well, then obviously you're not going to get many points. That you then understand the different things, that you can show with giving clear definitions. And that is, of course, also important, but still really basic. Then that you can apply the facts and the rules and the concepts and the ideas that gives you a little bit more points. So that is something that you, for example, if you say, we had this kind of situation in our group, and if you think about it using Cantor's four-player model, you can clearly see we were lacking opposing, the speech act of opposing. And then what we did was to sort of make a brainstorm on opposing. So there you see you are applying the theory. That gives you more points. Then analyzing, using the theory to analyze, give you even more points. To analyze the situation, it's the same thing. You look at a situation, you say, why did this happen? In some of your presentations, I mentioned this. You were thinking, we all agreed that we should talk more to our subscribers, but we didn't do it. Use the theory to analyze the situation, come up with a good explanation. Why did that happen? That will give you more points. Then if you can use if you have, for example, use the theories you can set out a number of possible options of how to deal with a certain situation, and you can evaluate the different options through this. That gives you even more points. And the last one is create. Sometimes they also call it synthesize. It's like when you sort of combine several theories into one, or like into a combined way of analyzing a situation. This, when you're reading the learning objectives for your different courses, you will notice that we use words that refer to each of these levels. So these are the learning objectives for this course. Describe and classify innovation strategies relevant to a given project. So describe and classify, that's the lowest level, right? Describe definitely is the lowest level. Classify is a little higher up. You're a little more towards the analysis. Describe and develop co-creation capabilities mentioned in the course literature. So again, it's like if you develop capabilities, that is about showing that you know how to apply the theory. So we're at the level of application. Identify possibilities for creating quick and inexpensive prototypes, minimum viable products to test and evaluate ideas. You see here the word evaluate. And the next one has identify and evaluate methods for community building and management mentioned in the course literature, and show the ability to apply this. You see the evaluate and the apply, they are words that belong to higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy. So spend more time on doing this. And then demonstrate the above through analysis of the engagement in the project centered on the digital platform of YouTube. So here you are asked to use the theories to analyze your own engagement with the project, your YouTube project. And again, that is one of the higher ones. So don't spend too much time on describing. It has to be accurate and precise, but no more than that. Cool. Meta texts, that was the last thing I talked about. That is just the thing about write what you're going to do, and then write what you did at the end of each section. Helps guide the reader through the text, so we know why are you saying the stuff that you're saying. Cool. References and abbreviations. Do I have something like this? Well, yeah, an academic paper versus an essay. In an essay, you do not litter the text with references. That would be weird, right? If you read an essay in a paper, you don't want a lot of references there because it lowers the readability. But in academic papers, you do use references. Use references. I like references. I'm quite in that camp. So, and it's a good preparation for your thesis where you will have to use references. Then you can see how the references are made. I think most of you probably know this. If you use a direct quote, it has to be followed by a reference with a page number. Use referencing tools, I've already said that. Abbreviations, blah, blah, blah. Use full name first time. Let's see, there's somebody saying something in the chat. I think if you just say it, it will be easier because I can't really exit the chat from full screen.
Could we use footnotes?
Yeah, you can use footnotes. That's fine.
Okay, perfect.
Cool. Proofreading. Well, I like using Grammarly. If anybody have a subscription for Grammarly, use it. As I say, mistakes in your language doesn't subtract from your grade, because you could see it wasn't part of the learning objectives. But if your language is so bad, and I have seen this sometimes, if it's written so sloppily that I can't understand what you're writing, then it will subtract from your grade. So, read through your paper, make sure, set off a little time to read through your paper and just make sure that it's reasonably formulated. I know English is not the main language of all of you, so this might be a little difficult for some. But yeah, put in a little effort to make sure that the text is nice. These are some of the common mistakes that I have seen in previous exam papers. I've mentioned some of them when I gave feedback on the different presentations, but I like to mention them again here. So the first one is buzzwording without showing understanding. Sometimes you will see text sections where people talk about, listening and respecting and yadi dadi dadi, and they use all the words from the theories, but there's no definition, and the way they use them doesn't demonstrate any kind of understanding of the concepts. Don't do that. If you use a concept, show that you understand it. Then misunderstanding concepts. You have heard me say this many times throughout class. Academic concepts, even though it's the same word that we know from everyday language, it doesn't mean the same. And it's particularly important with the artful making and the, well, many of them actually. So listening in Isaacs doesn't mean the same as listening in everyday language. Respecting doesn't mean the same as respecting in everyday language. Play doesn't mean the same. It's sometimes I see exam papers where they said we played a lot, and like, that's good for you, but that has nothing to do with artful making. Play is, as you know, it's a description of the kind of objects that come out of this particular way of working together. Tick boxing is another thing. Oh, incomplete analysis. Missing reasons, use of mentioned theory or drawing of conclusion. I write here, the analysis should include the observation, the data, the theory used, the line of reasoning that lead to the conclusion about future practices, for example, and it should not introduce theory and then later that is later forgotten. Sometimes people will mention theory, and then as they continue through the paragraph, they never return to the theory. So it's like weird. In the presentations, many times I said, this is really good, but dig deeper. That's because it's like, so you say, we didn't communicate much with our audience. That's a good observation, but that's the observation, that's the data. Continue from that. What theory are you going to use? Get curious about it. Show me an argument here. So don't stop too early in your analysis. That's a mistake that many people do. Tick boxing is, I know that sometimes you are sort of at CBS, sometimes you are schooled in something like a type of argumentation where you basically just want to show that you did everything right. That is not interesting for this paper. I want to see that you can think. I don't care about whether you did things right. Your YouTube project can have been a complete disaster, but if you can think and analyze and tell me why, you're gonna get 12. So sometimes I see like people writing, and then we used all the 4 different speech acts, and it was fantastic, and we created great videos. And then I go to their YouTube channel and I say, well, they created 5 videos, but they had like 2 views and 1 subscriber. Something wasn't done right. So be realistic. Don't try to convince me that you did everything by the book. It's much more interesting for me to see that you can apply the theories, to think about the stuff that you did, and that you can analyze it and learn from it. That is the kind of stuff that I'm after. Back claims with concrete experiences. Yeah, claiming that you did something doesn't demonstrate ability to apply theory. So if you say, for example, we we managed to go from the space of politeness to the space of breakdown and onward to inquiry and flow. We go like, great, that's a claim. Now show me what it is you saw, heard, felt that told you that that happened. Give me the concrete experiences. This is why throughout the course, I encouraged you to keep a journal, because then you have the concrete experiences. And the last one is make realistic claims, don't overclaim. Avoid sweeping generalizations. Ground your claims in concrete examples that will help making them realistic. If you use this, you're good.